let me start with calling on the first speaker, Manoj Rustagi, Chief Sustainability and Innovation Officer at JSW Cement. Manoj. Uh, Ashpreet Sethi, Head of Public Affairs and Government Relations at Evage. Jawhar Balasubramanian from Head Fulfillment and Logistics from Waycool. And last but not the least, and partner in crime, Vikrant Vaidya, who's also a technical partner for the climate group from pManifold Business Solutions. Great. Thank you so much, again, all the panelists for taking out time. I know Manoj, Jawhar have been, in fact, traveled cities this morning to kind of come here and be a part of this conversation. And Ashpreet, of course, thanks as well. Vikrant, you've come from Areri, Nagpur. I know it's been a hassle for you to come today, but thanks for taking time. With that, let's get into it. The basic building block of this conversation and the work that we are doing is that we wanted to look at the space that resides beyond the EV100. The EV100 campaign today, as you know, is a campaign which focuses on commitments taken by companies, but for vehicle segments which are the lower vehicular segments ranging from around 3.5 tons to around 7.5 tons. While we were looking at the entire landscape, and we thought this certainly kind of is possibly the space where some of this transition will begin with, which is the lower format vehicles, the lower segment vehicles, which is 3.5 and 7.5. We certainly believed as the climate group globally as well as domestically that there is an opportunity that resides beyond the space as well. And I think that was very well articulated by both Divya as well as Nitan. So something for us to remember and always recall, why are we having this conversation today? It is because 2% of the vehicles on Indian roads, which are these medium and heavy duty vehicles, the ones that kind of traverse medium and on a long haul as well, actually contribute to anywhere between 35 to 45% of the emissions on road today. So clearly, this is something that we can't close our eyes to, and that's why this was an important opportunity. Globally, at the Climate Group, while we are looking at this space, we'll soon also be announcing a campaign which is going to be an extension of the EV100 campaign, and we'll want businesses to take a commitment on those frameworks as well. We are going to be pushing companies to take these commitments. We will be wanting them to look at this framework of transition and switch over to EVs as well. Something that I mentioned, this is just the beginning. We know these are extremely nascent conversations. We are getting a lot of backlash while we kind of speak about these thematic areas as well, specifically looking and pushing the industry to be more ambitious on this. While there have been several challenges around the safety of electric vehicles as well. So while a lot of that, we certainly take a lot of what we do with a pinch of salt, but we certainly want to push ourselves and look at the broader horizon as well. So the moot question for us is, where do we begin? Nitan kind of lightly provided the landscape of several use cases and applications we have. Clearly, there's a huge landscape that we can tap into. But we'll have to start and begin from somewhere, right? And the initial analysis alongside with pManifold says, we'll have to look at beachhead applications. We'll have to look at beachhead use cases from where this begins. And we have parallels for that, don't we? We have parallels of that happening in two-wheeler sector. We've got parallels of that happening in the four-wheeler sector in some of these applications where we saw that switch over to happen. So while we do a lot of that, we have zeroed in on 3 use cases: perishable goods, parcel and market, and then the last one being also minerals is where we feel some of that transition to be. We are not saying in no ways that the transition won't happen the other sectors. We'll certainly want to look at that at the next stage as well, but this is where we begin from. With that, let me open up the floor, and to begin with, let's begin with the minerals use case. It's a unique use case. Manoj, could you help us? What in your mind do you think are the biggest drivers for switch over to electric vehicles, specifically for a cement sector? Why should they be looking at the electrification, the cleaning of vehicles in the cement sector? While I say cement sector, this also may apply for the other hard-to-abate sectors as well. But
so first of all, thank you, Climate Group, for initiating this discussion. This is something which is very exciting to look at in terms of opportunities which lie ahead of us. At the same time, it is just the beginning, and we have started the discussion now. So a lot of distance to be covered, but it is good to discuss about the ways, which are better ways, and the ways which are cheaper ways to do things, what we do. So just to give the perspective on the cement industry, in India, we dispatch around 360 to 370 million ton of cement every year. That's only the outbound of the cement dispatches. And then we have the inbound also, which is there for the cementitious material, for the clinker, for the limestone, and the mining of the limestone and gypsum. So in total, a freight of around maybe 700 odd million tons every year, which happen. 10 years back, the cement dispatches were 230 million ton, now it is 370 million ton, and by 2030, we are looking at a number with 5% CAGR in excess of 500 million ton, 530 or so. So that will take the freight itself for the cement industry in India to 1 billion. Now these numbers are huge. These are very, very large numbers. One of the thing, cement industry per se, if you look at the structure, it's a very local play. There are a lot of cement plants all over India. Most of the supplies which are done locally by the cement manufacturing companies. And the raw material is also sourced locally. For long distances, rail is used. I don't have the exact number, but I think for long distances, maybe 50 to 60% of the dispatches anyway happen with the rail, which is a cleaner way of transportation. But there also the last mile is done by road. The secondary freight is done by road because the rail carries whatever 3,000, 3,500 tons, and then that is distributed to the different customers and the depots. So it was when we at JSW Cement, we signed up with the Climate Group last year. We were the first cement company in the world, to sign up. We were forced to sign up all the 3 commitments. We did EV100, EP100, and RE100 in one single go. And we are responsible. So as a corporate, we see that there is an opportunity. There is an opportunity of the business case and opportunity also to reduce the carbon footprint. Specifically for cement industry, the carbon footprint opportunity is not very large in the supply chain. The reason for that is the cost of the supply chain for us is roughly 30 to 35% of the total cost. I mean, if you break it up. Whereas the scope 3 emission, which is coming out, is less than 10%, of the total emission. If we add up a scope 1, a scope 2, a scope 3 emission of the CO2. So 30 to 35% of the cost, for CO2 emission, which is less than 10% of the total CO2 emission. Having said that, the sheer volumes make a business case, and the sheer volumes, open up the opportunity which is there. So last year we identified one single use case. We've got a grinding plant which is in Vijayanagar. We've got an integrated cement plant which is in Nandyal in AP, 300 kilometers away. So we transport clinker from the integrated plant to the grinding unit, and we also take blast furnace slag, which is a waste from the steel plant, back to the integrated plant. So there is a return load, and the vehicles, are dedicated vehicles. So we identified that use case. We have placed order for 5 vehicles. We'll get the delivery next month. And that is a pilot, which we have already done. So we have started. And these are large vehicles. These are 40 tonners. So they will carry a payload of around 40 ton with 258 kWh a battery which is going to apply like 180 kilometers before it is to be charged, for 1.5 hours or so. So if that use case is successful, we are going to be identify all the opportunities, where we have the dedicated fleet, uh, and that is going to be converted. The other use case, which is there for the mining sector, is actually much bigger. It is there for the coal mines, for limestone mines, and the other iron ore and the other mining industry in India. Now there, the the dumpers which are inside the mines, converting them into the electric vehicle is actually a very, very good use case. Uh, we have not started working on that. We are still looking for some optimum solution, for that. Once we get that, we will start working on that also. But I see huge opportunity there within the mines, for all the open cast mines, to convert the dumpers into the electric vehicles. And that is going to be a trigger. Today, the one of the thing, the resistance, which is there for the transition is the transporters, they don't want to do it because of the high upfront cost. So we, as a company, we have purchased it. We have got our own transport company, so we have purchased it, and we are going to be investing in the infrastructure ourselves. But as we scale up, I think, it was discussed in the last panel meeting, the thing with the solar. So 10 years back, the kWh cost of the solar power, what it was and what it is today. Similarly, I think, the upfront cost of the electric commercial vehicles, ECVs, is going to come down drastically over a period of time. The vehicles which we have ordered, interestingly, the gearboxes are coming from China, the motors are coming from China, battery is coming from China, so it is not even manufactured in India. And that's one of the challenge. I think over a period of time, once the pull is there, and the motor, the transmission definitely can be manufactured in India, even if the battery is to be imported. Once it is done, the upfront cost or the acquisition cost of these vehicles is going to come down. And once it happens, I think there is a strong business case, to convert. The only question which was discussed in the earlier panel discussion, whether does it solve the CO2 problem? Because at the back end, we do not know where the electricity is coming from and whether it is a clean energy or it is a coal-based thermal power plant. So that is something, which is to be seen. But having said that, I think economic-wise, purely from the business case point of view, there is a huge opportunity and huge business case, for the transition. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Manoj. I think one thing that catches my attention is this thing about how is this transition going to be supported, while clearly businesses can play a role, but you also mentioned the third-party service providers, which operate the fleet, and what kind of support will be needed, and just imagining the conversation between a company and third-party service provider of what that is going to look like going ahead, because clearly the push will come from the corporations, but it's up to the third-party service providers to respond in that vein as well. We'll come to that because it's a cross-cutting question across all the different things, the different use cases that we have. So the next to Jawhar from Waycool. So Jawhar, again, welcome to the panel and thanks for flying from Chennai. While you tell a bit about how cool your company is and what it does in the food distribution business, could you also help us characterize the use case and why you feel that there is this need for you to be looking at, looking at zero emission trucks in your business? Is there while there clearly needs a business case that needs to be established for it, but are there technical linkages to the kind of products and things that you move, which also kind of pushes the case for moving and looking at this switchover? So if you could just, in the next 3 minutes, I'm just conscious of time, help us picturize what is the profile of one Waycool, but at the same time, what's the use case looking like, and where the biggest beachhead is. Thanks.
Thank you, Atul, and I thank Climate Group for putting up a platform like this to bring about the complete ecosystem at one page. so that the dialogue can be better heard at every circle where the push is needed, right? Coming to Waycool, we are a pretty new company. We are just 7 years old by last week. And we are into basically, to put it in a perspective, I would state our vision. We want to become the most efficient, impactful, and sustainable agri-tech platform which handles 1% of the global food. That is our vision. So if you ask me what is the primary driver for us to go towards electrification of our fleets, our vision itself states that we want to be impactful and at the same time it's sustainable, right? And whatever solutions that we are looking forward in our distribution, we always want it to be both climate smart and also business smart. If a solution is not going to be business smart, right? See, sustainability cannot come at charity. Sustainability has to be supported by business profitability, right? So that is a basic ethos for us. Being in line with this ethos, in the past 18 or 20 months of our journey, we were able to convert our last mile fleet. Up to 20% of our last mile fleet today is electric vehicles. And we have set about to reach about 40% of last mile fleet into EVs by March exit this year. Having said that, the bulk of our movement, which is inbound, close to 40% of movement which comes to inbound, is done through this medium and heavy commercial vehicles, which falls between 7 to 30 ton segment, right? All these are done in fossil fuels, just because we don't have an alternate for it, right? Currently in the market. So there is a definite use case for us for movement of perishable goods in this segment, wherein which, as rightly said, 35% of tailpipe emission comes from these M&HCV segment vehicles, right? So with this, I would say close to 105 million tons of food is being moved in India every year, right? You think about that, 40 to 50% of that food is being moved through M&HCV. And think about the volume and think about the emissions that comes out of it. So there is that very valid use case in perishable goods segment, wherein with a viable alternative, we can move into EV segment. Having said this, as a very small step towards this, we are trying to, with the available options, we are trying to convert our fossil fuel vehicles into CNG, because that is the only viable options for us in this segment, right? So 5% of our inbound fleet is currently in CNG, wherever it is possible, because the infrastructure is a big question, right? So wherever it is possible, we are converting it. The current situation, I would say, very like the important factor here is for the auto majors to show some enthusiasm in this, right? What I see is a lack of enthusiasm from automobile majors of this country towards electrification of M&HCV segment, right? I would say there is an eerie silence there. So, companies like Evage, right? They show some light at the end of the tunnel, if I may say. But other than that, there is complete silence from the other auto majors. Having they are the people who has the capacity to scale up and to completely fulfill the need of the industry. But we need some push there.
Thanks, Jawhar. I think you brought a very good point about the role of auto OEMs here. Clearly, there is an very airy absence of the auto OEMs in this conversation, and it's quite apparent from the panel that we have as well. We weren't able to get the big fours, right? Clearly because they wanted to evade this conversation, but hopefully by the next episode, we'll be having a few of them sitting over here. So we'll come to the auto OEM perspective, but let's close all the use cases first. Vikrant, you know the question. I don't have to pretend that you don't know the question. So can you give us a sense of how do you profile the third use case, which is parcel and market loads?
Thanks Atul for organizing this and also setting the context, how we went through the use case by use case and how we zeroed in on these three broad use cases. And we have heard from the first two use cases how seemingly difficult, right? Usually we perceive the heavy vehicle movement to be very difficult to electrify, but you heard from them how the predictability of the routes, the short and the short haul predominantly is dominated by these sectors where, as Manoj mentioned, that a lot of long haul is done by trains. Yeah. So a little contrast to that is the use case. It's literally doubling every year, riding on even the pandemic. In fact, it actually one of the rare sectors which benefited from pandemic where we see much faster growth with the deliveries. And there, one more thing has happened is already the first and the last mile has been more or less cracked. We have electric three-wheelers filling in for the first mile and to certain extent the last mile deliveries. We have, in India, we have the three-wheelers actually leading the electrification. Till this year, they were actually the biggest segment. This year, the two-wheelers have just overtaken, and that too, actually, two-wheelers have found application in the last mile delivery as well. Now, this brings in the focus to the last remaining segment in e-commerce, which is the mid-mile and the long hauls, which are catered to by the intermediate duty trucks, as we call it, and the medium and heavy duty trucks, respectively. Here, one of the challenge is e-commerce needs faster deliveries. We all order and we want next day delivery, right? So the amount of distance covered by the mid-mile as well as the long hauls in a day is phenomenal. We usually talk about 200, 300 kilometers a day. That's what we understand trucks to do. Yeah? But e-commerce, you won't believe they do even 600, 700, and even sometimes 800 kilometers a day. And that is enabled because you have those dedicated contracts being signed. You are enabling the delivery people to actually put in that extra effort to get the goods delivered within a short span of time. And then thirdly, the loading pattern is very unique here. You have more voluminous loading. Yeah, you get your packages, they are all bubble wrapped. Inside you have a box, inside you have a box, right? So it's all volume. There is hardly any loading. Yeah? And also, oftentimes they do not wait for the truck to fill up. That's what we hear otherwise. The truck won't move unless it is completely filled. But that's not the case with the e-commerce, where you can afford to and you are actually also driven by the customer demand to move as soon as possible. You fill up 50, 60, 80% and you move. And that 80% volume accounts for hardly half of the payload capacity of the truck. So although it's a long haul, although it's doing many kilometers per day, it's actually moving less amount of mass, and mass is what actually eats up your energy. The volume, anyway, you have containerized cargoes, so the volume doesn't play a role in energy as such, energy consumption. So this is going to be, again, one of the unique use cases where we can actually start early. There have been commitments by almost all e-commerce giants. Even in the rest of the parcel load segment, we have pilots being thought about, being conceived as we speak. And then one more good part of this is, unlike many other use cases where you have the load body, the cabin being built aftermarket, most of the trucks that are sold by the OEMs are chassis only, right? We see these moving on the highways, just a chair and half the windscreen. And that chassis actually gets built aftermarket. The load body, the cabin gets built off market or aftermarket. Whereas in case of parcel delivery, the OEMs are successively coming up with the vehicles which have built-in containers, which are factory built, and there is a demand, there is a ask for it, and that brings a lot of organization to the sector, that brings a lot of predictability also, and that brings a lot of control. We mentioned, as Atul mentioned, there is also concern about safety, right? So how do you feel that a vehicle which has battery assembled on it is going to see welding in terms of load body fixation on aftermarket. You do not have control over that. But if the vehicles are sold out of the factory with as a completely finished vehicle, these concerns also are well addressed, yeah, by the OEM themselves. So it's another use case where we are expecting a lot of uptake. There is a lot of there is a lot of corporate influence in this sector. As Atul mentioned, we have most of the e-commerce giants signing up for aggressive electrification targets, and they will definitely see that it is complied with, particularly after the success they have tasted in the first and the last mile.
Thanks, Vikrant. Thanks so much. Per delivery that's made in India, specifically looking at the last mile delivery emissions of the entire scope 3, is around 285 grams per carbon dioxide per delivery, as compared to the global average of around 204 odd grams per carbon dioxide per delivery. So clearly kind of lays out, just while we look at the last mile delivery leg of this, there's also middle mile, which can be extremely energy intensive, which can be extremely emissions intensive. And that's why this conversation becomes even more important. Ashpreet, to you, well, what's your outlook? Clearly a new age enterprise. Again, we haven't seen a lot of interest coming from the conventional players, the conventional automakers yet. What gives you the kind of faith for you to kind of take that, jump and leap to kind of do this and do this the way you're doing it? And also the second part, if there are any reflections on the needs of all the 3 use cases that have been articulated.
Sure, sorry. Am I audible? Is it fine? Sure. Great. So it was lovely hearing all of you, and thank you to the Climate Group for doing this and getting everyone on the same floor. Just to add context, yes, there's a huge opportunity. The incumbents or the giants might not be doing their bit, but we are there. Evage is there. There are a lot of startups that are already in the space. And at Evage, we firmly believe that the commercial electric four-wheeler segment is something that has been untapped. And we completely feel you, we hear you, that you need products in the segment, which is why we have a very global approach. We have an exoskeleton structure where we can design your vehicles as per your customization. And all the 3 use cases that have been highlighted are the segments that we are already looking at. We are speaking with state governments, we are speaking with center, we are speaking with clients, and we are looking at increasing the payload as per customers' needs. The first segment is a 1-ton vehicle, but we are going to increase that. So that was a brief on what EVH looks like, but addressing to the concerns that were mentioned on the panel, yes, there is a problem in terms of infrastructure, and I'm bringing in more from a policy angle because that is what I look at. Whether it's states, whether it's center, that kind of push that is required for startups like us, who are far and few, who are willing to cater to the needs of the industry, we're not really getting that kind of push either through policies or through incentives. So I would really like to use this platform to highlight that. Secondly, we are looking at a made in India product. We are not importing except the cells, there is no option. We are looking at people who might be setting up their plants, and we will tie up with them, but initially we have to import from them. But we are making the battery packs in-house, so in terms of fire safeties, etc. For high payload vehicles, it will, as far as our understanding goes, there will be 0 concerns with fire safety. In terms of ensuring that we deploy these vehicles in such a way that it caters to all companies' needs, there has to be a robust ultra-fast charging network. And it has to be across cities, hubs, across industries, and it has to be done in such a way that people are able to access it. Now, it can be done through a PPP model. Obviously, we cannot expect the government to do everything. So that's where we come in. We are happy to partner with different companies and set up their charging infrastructure at their hubs. So this is the kind of model most of the OEMs will be looking at. But we'll be happy to participate in that going forward with any of the companies that are already here. Also, you had mentioned in one of the questions that what does the opportunity look like? As per different studies, between 5 to 55 ton the number of vehicles that are going to come by 2030 is going to be 50% more. And I think JSW also rightly pointed out that yes, there are going to be higher payload vehicles. So we are willing to enter that market provided we get that kind of support, because ultimately we are a startup. And we also would like to highlight that, as someone said, I think you pointed out that we need factories which are near places where you can just take the delivery. We are looking at micro factories where you can just assemble the vehicle and pass it on to the customer. So these are the new kind of concepts that is required in India, not from a startup OEM, but from all OEMs across the board, because all OEMs need to work together. Also, obviously, they work in silos for obvious reasons, because business is not charity, as you rightly pointed out. But at some point, we need to come together on a platform.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ashpreet. I think we've got 5 minutes with us, and then we have to open for a few questions from the audience as well. I think one aspect, like I promised Manoj, we'll have to kind of take on is this conversation. What does the conversation with the third-party service provider look like? I mean, clearly a lot of the companies don't own their vehicles, and that's not just in the medium and heavy duty space, but it's also in the last mile and the first mile delivery sectors, that they don't want assets on their books, right? That's quite obvious. So while you kind of look at this horizon of transitioning, switching over to electric vehicles, what do you think the nature of that conversation is going to look like? Is it going to be more like a top-down thing that you have to do this, or is it something that you're going to help them out doing this?
No, I mean, I feel it is premature, to have this conversation, with the transportation companies, because I do not know what are the costs, Evage is talking about, but when I looked at, these 40 tonners or 50 tonners, we are talking about 3 times, 2.5 to 3 times cost of purchasing the vehicle. A transporter, with not dedicated fleet, but having, utilization which is varying across seasons, across months, across weeks, it's going to be very difficult, to invest so much of the money. So the corporate has to take initiative, and that is what we have done. So we have invested ourselves, we are spending money, and we are buying the companies, buying the vehicles, ourselves. And that is the lead. Once I think this discussion or this conversation is going to make sense, once the scale is going to come, if the people, the larger OEMs, they start manufacturing, if the Make in India thing happens, for the motors and for the gearboxes, the transmission, everything, except for the cells, when the cells come. So there was a discussion today morning that by 24, 25 we will have cells in India, but till such time, I think it is very premature, to have the transportation companies do the investment, so the corporates have to do it. But that is going to trigger. I think the trigger is needed, and the trigger is very much needed, for the corporates to take lead, and that's what we have done. And once the business cases and use cases are established, I think the opportunities are going to be huge, and all the OEMs, they will jump into it. I think it is just that they're waiting for it, because everybody, this is something so nascent, the people, I think it is something getting into, charting into unknown territory, I would say. The thing with the EV, whether it is actually clean, the electricity which you use, is it really carbon free? What is going to happen tomorrow if the fuel cells are going to come, if the hydrogen is going to be produced at $1, if the fuel cells are going to be a better way of, the mobility for the heavy vehicles, compared to the batteries and the disposal of the batteries. So there are too many moving pieces, which are there, and the clarity is not there. The best way to go about is to do the pilots, do more and more pilots, establish the business cases and use cases. And once they are there, I think the people are going to jump into it. Thank you.
Thanks, Manoj. Jawhar and Vikrant, any quick thoughts on discussions? How do you manage the fleet operator, the logistical provider conundrum?
Right. As you rightly said, Atul, we don't own even a single vehicle. We actually have a fleet of close to 500 vehicles, but we don't even own a single vehicle out of it. See, in the past, say, 6 years, right from 2016, we were in active engagement with multiple OEMs in EV space and also with multiple service providers. Right, we practically acted like a bridge between the OEMs and the service providers. I can give an analogy here with last mile, right? We work with close to 4 OEMs like Euler Motors, Omega Sethi, many other players, and we try to onboard our major logistic service providers into their own ambit, right? So our logistics providers will invest, and in turn the OEMs will give it as a service, right? One more thing that I want to point out here is, as rightly said by Mr. Manoj, the initial cost of a EV of a higher tonnage is going to be very high. Even on a conventional note, if you check, between the initial cost of a vehicle, the initial cost to total cost of ownership ratio on an ICE vehicle will be, say, around 8%. But when it comes to EV, it will be close to 35%, right? So I would say we should take an analogy from how passenger vehicles have been ramped up with EVs, right? For example, see, obviously it was done by STUs with government support. Right? Having said that, if we can go for a pay-per-use model, something like that, right, then it would make much sense for the businesses and also for the OEMs to quickly ramp up into higher segment vehicles in EV. Again, this requires the majors to come inside and invest on this and take care of the initial investments to go in the pay-per-use model, how they did for STUs.
Thanks, Jawhar.
Yeah, both very good points. Just adding to that, particularly from the perspective of, say, segments like e-commerce or parcel, what will really help the service provider in terms of deliveries? One is we have to create success stories. These delivery service providers, as rightly put by Jawhar, they are not going to work on charity. They are not, even somebody in the previous panel pointed out, I think it was Manu, that it's not going to crack eyes with them that climate is changing because their livelihood depends on that, right? So there has to be creation of success stories which will inspire them, which will give them confidence, and that will happen only if the biggies actually start with that capital investment, as Manoj said, they are already doing, running these pilots and creating those success stories. Because truckers, believe me, they will not trust my word, your word, they will trust a fellow trucker's word. And unless you create those success stories, it will not see the light of the day. And the second part is, at least even if you are actually putting in that capital and letting them run the vehicles, you still let them get that revenue what they were already earning in IC engine vehicles. Despite the operating expenses being lesser, let them get a taste of it. Let them experience themselves that the margins are bigger here in terms of operating costs. And that will get them very interested. And once, as somebody put in, again in the previous discussion, once you interest somebody in terms of the economics of any idea, they will get hooked into it and you will be actually flooded with demand.
Thanks, Vikrant. Ashpreet will take your final comments on anything that you want to reflect, but just adding a quick variable there as well, something that we've been doing in our study and looking at it closely, Vikrant, is that the average truck life or the average life of a truck of the existing stock in India is anywhere between 8.5 years to 10 years, right? At the moment, the existing stock, which means that there is a replacement cycle due in the next 5 years, because the scrappage policy terms that, after 15 years, all the vehicles will have to be scrapped, right? So there is a replacement opportunity there. Can we tap into that window and make sure some of these policies are lined up so that, this transition can happen well? But no, I think just calling it out, Ashpreet, just saying that this is one of the variables which is important for us to know, which will determine the switch over to EVs. But any final thoughts before we take questions?
Sure, no, so completely agree with you on that because that's how we are tapping the market. But just to add to everyone's concern about financial viability of EVs, as OEMs, we've taken, or as OEMs, all OEMs should take the responsibility of connecting the fleet owners with the financiers. That's what we are trying to do at our end and trying to make sure that the interest rate comes down. Agree completely, the interest rate is the highest for the heavy, medium, and last mile vehicles. So this has been a plea for to the government as well. There's no government official here, so the Hindustan sir has left. But we need to bring EVs under the priority sector lending, and that's how EVs will become more financially viable.
Whenever I hear that, I just say poor priority sector lending, right? Everyone is wanting to have a piece of it, but clearly the sector needs it. So with that, let's open to questions. Any hands up? Yes, we've got one. Sanjeev.
Am I audible?
Actually, we can hear you well, yeah.
No, actually touching on the last one. So I suppose it's a bit of a reflection rather than a pointed question. There seems to be a limitation or absence of this sector in particular, the medium and heavy duty vehicles, when we're talking about the policy frameworks across 30 states. Is there an opportunity to kind of make sure that it gets reflected more explicitly of creating both supply side but also the demand side incentives?
Great, thanks. Thanks for that reflection. Yeah, I think in many implicit ways, all of us have been wishing for that, because clearly there is no top-down steer at the moment on how this needs to be managed in terms of policy and program. Commercial vehicles of this segment aren't a part of the FAME2 scheme, right? But again, it's a chicken and egg, and the classic chicken egg, and that why would the government think of doing something of this sort until unless you have vehicles, you know, and auto OEMs are in fact doing some of that. So I think we'll have to break that thing as well. Any final one? We've got two there, and we'll maybe close with that.
So just one question to the Evage. What is the total cost of operations you're thinking? I mean, have you done some? I am sure you must have done some work on that. Because see, I'll give you the reason why I'm asking you. In passenger vehicles, we just heard in the earlier session also, intra-city is an area where, in buses, where some government support is required. But for intercity, already there's no subsidy, and operator have started putting in buses. Mumbai-Pune is an example where buses have started operating without subsidy and they're making profit. So why can't it happen in freight also?
Sir, it can. We won't deny it. But at this point, for the segment to pick up, because currently, I'll go back to the policy angle, our cities are not smart enough for freight movement. So if your freight movement has to be smart and it has to be electrified, we need some kind of additional support, a hand-holding at the beginning. That's all that we are asking for. Every other segment has got it, we haven't. That's the only thing we are trying to highlight. In terms of cost of operation, unfortunately, I won't be able to share that right now because we haven't officially launched our vehicle, which will be done in a quarter or two. But we'll be happy to share that once we do it.
But I think you can also comment on that.
Yeah, some of these segments, as you saw, our criteria for prioritizing these use cases. So you saw that it's not just the technical feasibility, but also the commercial feasibility, and taking into account even the lack of subsidy. In fact, subsidies in this segment could be thought a little differently as well. What happens is hardly any truck is bought without financing, right? All the trucks are bought with financing. So instead of giving even a direct purchase subsidy, there could be, as Ashpreet also suggested, the lending rates could be relooked at. There could be a subsidy in the lending rates itself. Even the tenure of the loans could be relooked at, because usually the life of the truck, at least in its first use, is around 7 years, at least 7 to 8 years. Whereas the lending tenures currently are around 3 years. Some people lend up to 5 years. Even that coupled with interest subsidy can actually go a long way in bringing that parity. And our initial analysis shows that even with these, without giving a direct purchase subsidy, you will have parity in the coming couple of years as the battery costs come down. The battery costs were actually supposed to be much lower, but because of the pandemic, because of the disruptions of the supply chain, we saw that little lull and in fact a little bit hike in the battery costs, but they are again coming down. In a couple of years, actually a lot of these use cases are already viable in the total cost of ownership.
Hi, Adnan here from Ola Mobility Institute. So how do you see the approach of some auto manufacturers like Maruti Suzuki, who are looking at interim solutions to clean mobility? Like they announced they are shifting to, they're adding more CNG-based models to their fleet, to their lineup. How do you see that for heavy-duty vehicles and for medium and long-term freight? Would that be a more sustainable option, like for clean mobility, like for energy transitions, or should a direct approach to EVs be more suitable?
Anyone? CNG as a transition, Jawhar?
CNG as a viable option if you evaluate. CNG emissions are, when you compare it with diesel emissions, it is close to 60% of what diesel emissions would be, right? So I wouldn't say it is a very clean energy that you're going to look at as a viable option. Maybe, as you rightly pointed out, it can be an interim solution, but not the final solution.
While we are upgrading to cleaner grids, while you're supplying our grids with renewable energy, would that be a good option? Not just CND, even bio-CNG can be explored as an alternative.
See, at the current state, if you see the market and if you see the available options, either you have diesel or CNG, right? FECVs are, I would say, a little far away. I'm seeing EVs are more nearer when you compare to FECVs in India currently, right? Current discussion is also about less than 500 kilometers of run, right? FECVs come into play only when the trip is more than 500 kilometers. So I see CNG as an interim solution till we get a viable product and a viable solution for an EV. That would be the right direction to go in. Having said that, I just want to answer so your question. I see a key differentiator here. Instead of seeing a MED HCV EV as a product, if the OEMs give it as a service, then the user and also the logistics providers will be protected from their initial investment cost, because that is the key differentiator in the last mile segment. Many of the OEMs are giving it as a service, right? That is the basic element that helped us to scale up from 6% to 40%, sorry, 20% in our last mile fleet.
Great, great. Thanks so much. I think we've got an engaging conversation going here today. And thanks everyone on the panel, Vikrant, Ashpreet, Manoj, as well as Jawhar, for all the inputs that you've shared with us. This is the beginning of the conversation. We'll have several conversations going on this subject. This is just the second episode as part of the initiative we are running via the climate group as well as alongside with pManifold. We see this dialogue continuing for the next 12 to 15 months. There will be a few investments on pilots as well, Manoj, so maybe at some point we'll want to leverage your membership, your partnership, to see if some of those pilots can be done. But that's really it. I won't, kind of take the pain of summing this up. I think it's going to be an incredible job if I pull that off to kind of summarize this. But with that, I'll close today's thing. I would want to just thank all the funders, all the donors who've been an incredible support to see this through with us. Women Business Coalition, Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation, and Climate Works Foundation.